Yes.
E alle due. Buongiorno a tutti. Cominciamo subito con le domande, che non abbiamo molto tempo. Potete scrivermi sulla chat così io vi chiamo uno alla volta in ordine di prenotazione. E cominciamo con la prima domanda con Alessandra De Luca. Vai.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here. Hi. I think you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
Hello. So thank you very much for this movie. And can you please elaborate a little bit about this sense of the common good that drives this character?
The common good is something we all know in all our society, is the idea that the single private person is part of society and that we own things together, like our streets, our parks, and other institutions, and we care together for these institutions, that we all profit from them in the same way. The common good is a big notion, and I think we all noticed that in the pandemic and after the pandemic, the idea of the common good suffered a lot. And that when we all came back from the pandemic into our streets, into common life, the idea of everybody for himself or herself was much stronger than everybody for each other or for the common good. And when I came to Tokyo in last May, I realized that the people of Tokyo, even if they've had the longest lockdown in history of any city, when they finally were back out, they did this with much more respect for their common good, which was their parks and their streets, for instance. And there was much more a sense of, it's beautiful that we can get out, but this belongs to all of us, and we want, and each of us takes attention of it. Here in Berlin, at the end of the pandemic, the little park where I lived was in 2 weeks devastated. In 2 weeks, it was a garbage heap. When we came back from the pandemic, we got used to the fact that the scooters are all over the sidewalks, the street, in parks. Everybody just drops the stuff because they don't own it. It's the common good and they don't pay attention. In Japan, I saw the opposite, and that's why I thought the common good was an important topic after the pandemic, and I took the chance to make a film about it in Japan because I felt there was more of a sense for it living there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra.
Allora, la domanda a Valerio Cappelli.
Mi sentite?
Sì.
Okay. I'd like to know, we don't know anything about the protagonist, just a few details. Why he chose that life? And the second question is, I know that you could talk with the protagonist just with the body language. Can you say something about this? No, because he didn't speak English. No, I read. Yeah, that's it.
Well, the actor himself was somebody whose work I knew really well. I loved his films. I almost knew each and every one. I had seen him first in Shall We Dance, and then in Babel, and I slowly saw all his films, and I thought he was one of the great actors on the planet. And he had a big heart, and there was something in the way he looks that I was always attracted to in films. So when he accepted to be that public servant that I wanted to write about, and I wrote the film for him because he said, I'm going to be in this movie if Wim does it. So I could write the script for him. We couldn't really speak with each other because we needed a translator. And of course, we spoke with the help of a translator. But in the film, when you shoot, you do not want to always talk to a translator, we got used to talking with just a little gesture and with the eyes. And sometimes I did speak with body language by a gesture or so. And after a while, we understood each other so good that just a little gesture on my behalf was needed to adjust a little bit a scene. So we really learned to speak without words. And he had become the character of Hirayama so much that I didn't have to adjust that much. He was Hirayama. Actually, on the set, I called him Hirayama. I didn't call him Koji or Mr. Yakusho anymore. I called him Hirayama because even to my cinematographer in the morning, I said when we drove to the set, we're going to see Hirayama. And it felt like we were making a documentary about a fictional character, more and more so. We learned how to work with him without rehearsal. At least when he was alone in the scene, we always shot immediately. We discussed briefly what the scene was about, and then he did the scene like he felt it was right, and we shot it already because you wouldn't rehearse with a documentary character either. If you shoot a documentary, you just shoot what the person does. And we started to do that because he was our Hirayama. And he became it so completely that we did feel we were making a documentary about our fictional character. And in the story, you know that he must have had a different past. You more and more know, well, this guy was not a toilet cleaner from the beginning, but I always felt it wasn't necessary that I give too many hints. I felt it was good if you as the audience fill that in on your own. You fill in where he come from, and after a while you have some indications. You know his sister, she comes in a big, expensive limousine with a driver. So you really realize that this was the background of Hirayama himself. And he probably lived a very privileged life. And something must have happened that he chose this life. When his sister asks him, do you really clean toilets? He doesn't answer with words. He just answers with his face. And he tries to show her that, yes, that's what I really do. And I love it. He just tries to make her understand. So he made a choice at some point in his life to lead a much simpler life. And apparently, as you see in the film, he's quite happy doing it. But I felt as an audience, it was better if you feel that in yourself and if everybody feels it in his or her own way.
Ok, la parola a Giulia Bianconi.
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you.
Ciao, Giulia.
Hi. So I have two questions, if possible. The first one is about your protagonist could be considered a Mr. Nobody. And I was wondering if, do you think we live in a world in which persons that do also intellectual works feel more important than others? And the second one is about, often we try to escape the repetitivity of life, and your protagonist embrace it. So do you feel that, do you feel the repetitivity of your work and you try or to escape or embrace it? I don't know if it's clear. Thank you.
I understand that.
Thank you.
I think he does live like Mr. Nobody. He lives a very modest life, but you also realize that he has eyes for each and every person. When the banker enters his toilet, he silently walks out and lets him use it, and the banker pretends not to even see him. But so he is a Mr. Nobody. He is invisible for a lot of the people who look at him as a serviceman. But he himself sees everybody, and he also sees the homeless who lives next to the toilet, and he greets him and he pays him his respect, and he really sees him. So for him, people are all alike, And even if for many people he is Mr. Nobody, that doesn't seem to bother him, because he answers this disrespect with the same respect he has for everybody else. He doesn't answer it with anger. He doesn't react. He knows who he is, and he's happy who he is, and he has a big heart for each and every person and for little things. And indeed, he does work. He has a routine. And the film is very much about a man who has a very strict routine. And you slowly understand this routine, and you slowly see that he likes his routine and that it gives him structure, and that he does the same in many ways every day. But the more you see him, the more you feel that it is not boring, and that he fills it every day with a new sense, and that he has the capacity to very much live in the now and here. And therefore, a routine gives him structure, but it's nothing that burdens him. Actually, it gives him a lot of freedom inside that routine to see a lot of things and to do a lot of variations and to pay a lot of attention. So you realize routine is not necessarily just a negative thing. In our lives, when we talk of routine, it is very often something we can do without thinking, without looking. We can do it asleep, so to speak. Routine has a very negative connotation in our own civilization. But the way Hirayama lives his routine, it's almost like it becomes a ritual every day. He invests a lot into it as if it was the first time he does it each time. And he tries to do it each time as good as he can and as present as he can possibly be in that moment. And seen this way, I think a routine is something that can give you structure. And when I see his routine, myself, I feel, wouldn't it be great if your life had a little bit more routine as well? I almost, when I watched him, I almost felt routine was something that I was missing, and that would help me with my own way. I mean, I have a routine when I make a movie, but only then. When I make a film, I get up every morning at 6 o'clock, and I live a very much more routine life. But outside of a routine, my life is quite loose. And watching Hirayama, myself, I do think, well, a little bit more routine would give your life more stability. So routine is not only something negative, routine is also something that gives you a certain freedom and to find the variations in it, and it gives you structure, and structure is not such a bad thing.
Thank you.
La domanda a Giovanni Bogani.
Giovanni, buongiorno. Oh, we don't hear you, Giovanni.
Audio. Now you hear me. Okay, good morning, and thank you for the movie, which is great for me. How much important was for you as a director to keep it simple, to be simple in your filming action gestures, simple actions? And there's a sentence which stuck me very much, is when he says, next time is next time, now is now, to the nephew. Is it about being here and now, some sort of a Zen concept, the conscious of being here in this moment, just in this moment for you? And how did you work on the dream scenes with your wife, Donata? Thank you.
So the first question was, the first part of the question was about my own means. I felt very strongly that if I make a film about somebody who has simplified his life, who has enormously simplified his life, and who has enormously reduced his possession to only what he likes and what he needs, then in order to make a film about him, I had to do the same. And we totally simplified our own possibilities. We shot the entire film from the shoulders of my director of photography. The film is entirely handheld. There is no shot on tracks. There is no shot on Steadicam or gimbal or crane, all these fancy means. The film was always entirely shot by Franz, handheld. And it reduced our own possibilities. We shot with little light, and we shot with a very simple frame, which is an old-fashioned frame. It's a 3x4 frame. It's more like a format of older movies, or Don Camillo and Peppone, so to speak, that era, or Ozu's movies are also shot 3x4, or even the silent films. And it's an old frame. And it seemed to me that his life and his simple apartment fit well into this old-fashioned frame. You also see the floor. And especially in the toilets, you need to see the floor because it's part of his work. So we shot in this sort of old-fashioned 3x4 frame, and that was part of the reduction. And we only had one technical possibility, that was the shoulders of my director of photography. Hirayama, for me, in my eyes, is a little bit of a monk. He does live a little bit like a monk. And as he is a Japanese person, he is a little bit of a Zen monk, yes. And his philosophy to live in the now and here has a long tradition in Japan. And if you want, it's a Zen practice to strengthen the awareness of the here and now. And his niece, who likes to think of the future and likes to make plans, that's the only thing he tries to convey to her as maybe something for her own life. Be more in the here and now, and you'll don't think of the future, think of what we are doing now. And she likes the message, and she even tries to turn it into a little song playfully. It's one of my favorite scenes when he, a little bit seriously, tells her this message, and she takes the message and makes something almost childish from it, or childlike from it. So I love that moment. And anyway, Hirayama is not somebody who gives any messages with a raised finger. He is a light-hearted person, and he is not into teaching. He just feels his niece should know him a little better and should know the way he lives a little better. What was the last part of your question?
Your work with your wife Donata on the dream
yes,
sequences.
Yes. It felt to me that in order to understand Hirayama, when I wrote the script together with Takuma, my Japanese co-writer, we felt that it would be interesting to, at the first day when we showed him, to see him read his book in the evening and then put it away and fall asleep. And I really wanted to go into his dream for just a moment as a reflection of the day and sort of the little pieces that he remembers. And it seems to me that it was nice if he remembered other things than other people, if he remembered more what was important to him that day. And that's not the events of the day, but rather the little events of the day, the lights and the shimmering of the sun and things you normally see from the sides of your eyes. So we wrote a dream that was very much like what the Japanese describe as komorebi, which is that a beautiful word for the play of sunlight going through leaves, and the leaves are moving in the wind, and you see a little reflection on the floor or on the ceiling. And it's something we all see sometimes in daily life, but very rarely we put attention to it. And Hirayama does pay attention, and I felt it was nice if those were the reflections of the day for him, those little unimportant moments. And every now and then there's also a face or a gesture or a little thing from the rest of the day. And as we had such a limited amount of time, that was part of our limitation, that we did the film in 16 days with our actor. Then we had 1 day without him. So we shot the film in 17 days. It's really very, very quick. And I realized I didn't have the time with my main crew to shoot these dreams or to shoot elements of this dream, which simply didn't have time. And I looked at Donata, who, as always, was going to be there and do the still photography, which she always does in all my films, because I like the way that she's always present and that she sees the whole day and that we can talk about it in the evening. She's my main witness, so to speak, what happens during the day. And then I realized I had the perfect person already on the crew to take care of these dreams and shoot these tiny little moments, because Donata has also started to shoot little installations of her own. So she moved from being the still photographer to being the dream recorder during the day. And she was with us as a one-woman crew, sometimes with our main crew and sometimes on her own. And she was just accompanied by a local Japanese location manager. So there were two ladies, and they produced all these dream works. And Donata also edited the dreams on her own. There are her little creations, and as she was very intensely part of our crew at the same time, and we spoke about every day what I thought I would love to see in the dream and the reflection of that day. At the end of the day, she was our dream crew.
Grazie. La prossima domanda, Gloria Satta.
Hello, hello, Wim. Thank you very much for this wonderful film. So my question is, you are in competition at the Oscar, you represent Japan. Have you seen some other international film who are in competition in the same section with you?
Oh yeah, I saw some of the films. I saw Zone of Interest, for instance, which is the British entry. I saw the German film, The Teacher's Lounge. I saw quite a number of the films who are in the section Best International Feature. I'm quite proud to be representing Japan, although it's quite unusual. And when our Japanese producers called me and said, "You won't believe it, but the Japanese committee nominated Perfect Days to be our entry to the Oscars." I mean, the film is not nominated, it's a Japanese entry, and we will see later, next week, we will see if it is
the short list, yes.
If it's in the short list. So I was a little shocked because I realized that is quite a responsibility for me as a German. But then again, I realized why the Japanese had done it, because there were other great Japanese films, both in Venice and in Cannes. It's not that this was the only Japanese that could have been sent to the Oscars. I think the Japanese like their actor Koji Yakusho so much. He's such a hero in Japan and so loved. I think they sent him into the Oscars, and me, I'm just the director's sidekick of Koji Yakusho.
Okay, if I may ask you another question, is after the pandemic, we are wondering what's the future of cinema, art cinema, made by authors, directors like yours. What do you think after the pandemic, as cinema changed, as the audience changed their attitude to cinema?
Well, it still remains a little bit to be seen. Initially, cinemas in the first month after when cinemas opened again, they seemed desperately empty, and the first results were poor. And now more and more so, theaters, and especially art house theaters, are full, at least in my country and in France, where I was quite often in the last year, and also in America. I've seen a lot of packed and full art house theaters. So in a beautiful way, the audience has come back, and I think they realize what they have in these films, and that it is a personal voice they can listen to again. And right now, art house theaters are thriving, at least in my country and in France. I know that because Ansem is doing really well in Germany and in Paris. Perfect Day started, and it had almost 200,000 people seeing it in the first 2 weeks. So, and it is strictly playing in art house theaters. So that's really more than I ever expected. So, and I just come from 10 days in America, where I traveled a lot to art house theaters, and wherever I went, it was packed. And sometimes in Paris, when I had time, I walked around in the evening, and I did go into some little theaters in Saint-Germain where they were playing old movies. For instance, one day I went and realized, oh, there was a movie theater, and they played one of my favorite films with Alain Delon, The Samurai. And I thought, oh, I just go in, and I expected to go in and be one of 3 or 4 people. It was midnight. I thought we're going to be 3 or 4 to see The Samurai, and I was so happy to see the film again. I hadn't seen that film for 40 or 50 years, and I got the last ticket. I was sitting in the first row, and it was packed. It was full. I could not believe it. At midnight, an old movie, it was packed. And I went on another day to see East of Eden, the same phenomenon. People stood around the block to see it. So somehow I feel the need for theaters is slowly coming back, and there are also a lot of young people there. So I have a great hope that in spite of the pessimism after the pandemic, the need for the place theater is back.
Ok, la domanda a Gabriele Agnola.
Gabriela, buongiorno.
Grazie, ma credo ci fosse prima Chiara di me.
Ah, ok. Scusa, vai Chiara.
Ciao Chiara, io.
Ciao, ecco, mi sentite? Grazie Gabri. Music plays a very significant role in Yama's life, and also in the film. I must say, the feeling is that there's always the right song in the right moment. So I wanted to know, how did you choose the right song to, let's say, amplify emotions that, the soundtrack from classical rock to soul music, that could resonate with the film and the character?
When we wrote the script, Takuma and I, we put, without much thinking, the idea in that Hirayama was still listening to cassettes because he was driving this old little beat-up van, and in that little van, the only thing that would work is a cassette recorder. So we put cassettes in, and as we thinking of him living with reduced means and recycling things, like every evening he reads a book, but he only reads one book, and when he's finished it, he puts it away and he buys one other book for the next week. Or he uses his old film camera, but he finishes the film and then he puts it to be developed and buys one more film. So we realized with that sense, he would still use his old cassettes, and he still had those from the time he was young. So we put in cassettes into the script, and as he was listening to cassettes and putting in every morning one when he goes to work, I put in the song that I thought it'd be nice if he listened to it. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I cannot really impose my musical taste on a Japanese character. So I asked Takuma, my co-writer, is it okay if I put in a song that I would listen? And he said, oh, Wim, in the 70s, when we were young, we listened to exactly the same music you listened, and we did listen to the Velvet Underground and Patti Smith and the Rolling Stones. Don't worry, you're not imposing your taste on Hirayama. So I just put in all the music I thought he should hear and he would hear. And in the end, I realized what I did for the film in the script and all the songs I put in was a little bit like a mixtape, a compilation tape like you would do at the time on cassettes. So the music became more and more my very own compilation tape for Hirayama. And when we shot the film, we realized, and I was not aware of it, but we realized that the audio cassette culture was coming back in Japan in a big way, and that there were shops all over where people could buy virgin audio cassettes and vintage tapes, and the prices Hirayama gets quoted for his tapes, like for the Lou Reed tape for $120. This is not imagination. That was what he would have paid for that cassette. Vintage cassettes are very up to date. So out of a sudden, Hirayama realized he's pretty cool. He has the good stuff. And a whole generation looks at these objects. Well, they're not exactly hi-fi, but they're very practical, and you can do something that you cannot do today on Spotify with your playlists. You can do compilation tapes, and compilation tapes are something very beautiful and personal, and it's like storytelling. You can tell a story with the order of songs and with the first song and how it goes to the next one. And I looked at the music for this film like mine or Hirayama's compilation tape for his life.
La parola a Gabriele Nognola.
Grazie. Thanks. So we've been talking today a lot about this movie being in very different ways old-fashioned frame, old-fashioned music. It also works like a silent movie in some ways. On the other hand, you've been experimenting your whole life with new ways to do film, with new techniques and new supports, the 3D, the video, etc., etc. And yet I feel from what I see in theaters and what you just said about the theaters being packed, that this is one of the most successful films you've done, at least in the last decades. Do you think there's a connection between these two things, between a movie which plays with its being old-fashioned and the success that it's seen?
Well, I do think that film language, contemporary film language, for many people has become too loud and too complex and too fast. And I feel that there's a certain nostalgia for a film language that is more like storytelling again, and not so much like overwhelming or there's a certain violence in a lot of the film you see today, not as a topic violence, but a certain violence by which they come at you and by how fast you need to see and understand and by how loud they are. So I feel that after the pandemic and after we all had been away from movies and we all try to redefine how we would like to live. I mean, during the pandemic, we all figured after the pandemic, maybe we start living differently. At least I did. And then we didn't start living differently. We started to live even more hectically and more greedily, it seemed to me. So the cinema is a beautiful place to reconsider how we would like to live. And I figured a little bit more calm and a little bit more serene would help us all. In a strange way, Hirayama even if he is a fictitious and maybe even utopian character, he does help us to reconsider how we might want to live. And the cinema has always been a place to show us how we can live. So contemporary cinema speeds us up most of the time, and I felt there is a need for our lives getting more grounded again. And I think you don't have to call it nostalgia. I think you just have to call it that there is a need for slowing down a bit. And maybe that's what Perfect Days represent.
Mauro Donzelli, poi sono le ultime due domande. C'è prima Mauro
Sì.
e poi Fulvia.
Grazie.
Grazie.
Hi, hello. And talking about relationship with Tokyo and Japan in general, how do you think it changes? The city is a very important character, of course, and in a way it represents both at the same time what is tradition and innovation. So in which way changed the country and Tokyo, in which way all these huge buildings, but at the same time little neighbors reflects maybe the inner space of the character.
Yes. Tokyo, when I first came to Tokyo was in the mid-70s. And it was the very first time I was in this country, and you could say it's quite a remote country seen from Germany or seen from Europe or Italy. But when I first came there, I felt strangely at home. I felt, oh, wow, what is it? I feel like I've always been here. Something made me feel at home. And it was just the city itself. It was the presence of modernity and sometimes even science fiction, like these 2 or 3 story streets, highways in the middle of the city. It was the sky risers. It was the huge video walls, but it was also the presence of these old areas and the fact that Tokyo, unlike our own cities, who are all more divided into living areas and business areas and commercial areas, in Tokyo, it's all one huge mixture. And you might be in a very modern area and you turn around the corner and you are in a village. And I always loved that. But Tokyo, in a strange way, is no longer so much science fiction for me as it was in the 90s. You realize Tokyo went through a hard time, the Japanese went through a hard time, and they had an economic setback. And now they're coming back, and it's all a little bit more quieter. It's no longer as much science fiction. If you want to go science fiction, you have to go to China or see other cities. Tokyo has settled down, and Tokyo feels more grounded to me today than in earlier days when I saw more like a science fiction city in it. It has caught up with our own times, and it's very much the present tense now for me, and it is contemporary and no longer in the future. I've been to China too recently, and that is much more in the future. And people are running around in their own cities, not recognizing it anymore. And there are still people from the present tense, but they live in a city that is out of the future. Tokyo has come and become a very livable city again, I feel. And the people of Tokyo are very disciplined, and Tokyo is one of the cleanest and most welcoming cities. And as you know, you don't have to be afraid. You will not be burglared. You will not be robbed. You can go through dark streets, even as a woman, and you do not have to be afraid. And that's such a pleasant thing. You feel the absence of this permanent danger that we know in our cities is really extremely pleasant to your heart. And you enjoy the fact that you live that you are in a city without having to be scared. And especially when you're in America and you come back to Tokyo, you really notice that the absence of fear in the city. So that's what I have to say.
Fulvia, l'ultima domanda.
Sì, mi sentite?
Sì.
Sì, bene.
Hi, salve. I wish to ask you, this is a film also about, I think, about hope. And I wish to know if you have this feeling in this moment of your life, if there is hope, even if we are in a terrible historic moment. And in which way do you feel different from your beginning of your career?
Well, if I look at the beginning of my career, which is the beginning of many of our lives, we're all in the 70s, living a much more quiet and peaceful life. Seen from today, it was almost idyllic. Our cities were much more idyllic than they are today, and public life and the world situation seems like it's more of a turmoil than ever, and there are much more reasons to be scared and to not want to look at the news more and more so. And so I cannot separate my films and my own feelings from the world situation. And it was all much easier, it seems to me, in the 70s and 80s. And there was, of course, sometimes personal grief, and there was sometimes danger and threat. But altogether, it was on a different scale. And it seems like everything has accelerated so enormously. And that is, of course, part of the digital revolution and what it did with our lives and with communication. And our lives happen so much faster now. Our communication happens so much faster. We're in touch with so many more people at the same time through social media. We know so much more at the same time about everything that happens in the world. And so it's all tremendously more overwhelming than ever before. So, and then all of us were sort of all coming to a halt during the pandemic for two and a half, almost 3 years. And we all had time to imagine how life would go on. And I was really hoping life would go on in a calmer way, and we would, as societies, be more drawn to peace. But then the opposite happened. And now we're living in a world with several wars going on at the same time, and even not so far away from us, actually quite close to us, all of them. And so I feel as societies and as human beings, we have to reconsider if that is the world we want to pass to our children, and if that is the world we want to really get old in. So I think it's good for cinema that it has the ability to give us other models. And in a strange way, the simple life of Hirayama, I mean, it's maybe not what we can actually live ourselves, but it gives an idea, or it gives us a certain utopian wish of a different kind of speed and a different kind of way to look at what we consume. And I think we all have in ourselves a deep longing for simpler lives. And Hirayama maybe shows us a very simple life, but by showing us a simple life, I think the idea of a more simpler life is something that we all feel in ourselves and a longing for it. And maybe that's what I wanted to do with this film. I just wanted to give an example that helps us free our mind for seeing options for ourselves.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Wim. Now we have 7 minutes 3 slots for the news, telegiornali.
Okay.
Start with Francesco Gatti.
Vi faccio uscire a tutti dalla riunione.
Grazie.
Go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Ciao.
Grazie ragazzi.